right, I have a presentation that I want to share just to discuss tryouts in general. It's that time of year for club soccer tryouts. It's a good thing for kids going into high school tryouts or even college tryouts to kind of think about as well. I have created this presentation for a number of different groups, including my club. I tried to make this kind of as broad as I could, so I really wanted to be impactful for a lot of people in a lot of different places. So, what I want to share, I'm going to jump over here and show a TV screen so that I can edit this a little bit easier in the future. And one of the things I want to talk about is the fact that tryouts do happen every year. It's really difficult. I wish it didn't. I wish we could commit the kids for longer periods of time, but there are also a lot of reasons why every year is a good idea. There are a lot of things I would change if I could, but this is the way it is right now. And I just want to address some things that happen. For one thing is anxiety. This can be a really tough time. I think it probably really starts with parents. I think when kids start going through the tryout process, they sometimes don't know. I know when my oldest daughter went to her first ever tryout, I actually took her there and made her believe that the club was trying out for her. Told her that she was in a situation where if she liked how things were going to go, then if she enjoyed the tryout and she enjoyed the coaches, then we would consider whether or not we were going to stay with that club. And that allowed me to kind of address it in the way I wanted to. After that, though, she knew the case. So it's tough, I think, for parents, and then eventually it does become tough for players as well. But I also want people to understand it's not an easy time for coaches. Things are not as cut and dry as they sometimes are made to, that people are sometimes made to believe. It's a really tough time for coaches. I know we all lose a lot of sleep. We spend a lot of time doing this. I've done tryouts and helped with tryouts for a number of clubs over the past 2 decades. And this stuff is taken very seriously. We spend hours and hours and hours. You go to the tryout to the fields, and then we end up sitting in an office somewhere or at dinner somewhere and going over things and talking about teams and talking about placement of players. And we have to make some really tough decisions. And sometimes coaches and other coaches disagree, or coaches and directors disagree on the best course to take. None of it is taken lightly. And when we have those tough situations, it's really tough on coaches as well. So I hope people do understand that it's not taken lightly. So I do think it's important that people understand that this is something that helps kids in the long term, though. People are going to apply for jobs, and people are going to apply for colleges, and you're going to hope to get a promotion one day. And sometimes it can be something that causes a lot of anxiety. And I like the fact that athletes have been through it before. So I think it's important. It is a time where there is a ton of rumors and gossip. There are a lot of things going on. You're going to hear players start to talk about things with their friends. You're going to hear parents talk about things among other parents. I have seen people start rumors and start gossip just to benefit their teams. It's a difficult time of year. And these things can be really, really challenging. So when you do have questions, I highly suggest you speak to your coach. I highly suggest you speak to the directors in a club, and don't take don't take it as true until you have heard both sides of the story, and just understand it's kind of a gross time. There are periods of time where people are breaking rules. There's a lot of rule bending. I sit in meetings and I listen to coaches talk about tryout rules, and there are a lot of things made to help the clubs. So there are people that agree on the rules. There are people that will point out someone broke a rule. Sometimes it was done intentionally. Sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes there's confusion about rules because things do change, and then sometimes clubs are involved with many different leagues and organizations and things like that. So it can be tough sometimes, and for the most part, everyone tries to follow the rules, but there are groups out there that don't, and they know what they're doing. So if you feel like some rules are being broken, ask your coaches and talk about it, and ask the questions you need to ask. Um, our club feels it's very, very important that athletes and families have the right to choose a club. Sometimes this situation just isn't great. And I watch these meetings unfold and the discussions about rules for tryouts. And sometimes people try to make it so that the kids in their own club have to make a decision to stay with their own club before another club can even speak to them. And I know the people that I coach with and work with, and myself, we all agree that families and players should be given the right to choose. And if they want to go try out another club because they're not positive that the current club they're in is the right fit, they should be able to do that. And if anyone ever feels like they need to make a decision before they've had a chance to explore their options, we're not putting kids in the right situation. So I am a strong advocate for a player's right to choose and the opportunities to do that, that allow people to choose. So what I did was a couple years ago, I put together this presentation, and I based it on Liverpool. I wanted to take away any thought that I might be talking about specific players or specific situations or the club I was with at the time or the club I'm with now. And I just got rid of that. And I created it based on if I was coaching Liverpool and it was in a club soccer system like in the United States. So what I did was I took the previous 10 games for Liverpool and I put down their starting lineups and the substitutions that they made. This is the previous 10 games to when I made this presentation. You can see every starter, the positions they played, and then the substitutes that were made. And from that, I refined it a little bit to get an idea of who was starting and who was a substitute, who was playing in most of the games. And you can see Virgil van Dijk started and played in all 10, and a few other players as well. Down at the bottom end, you can see Harvey Elliott was a substitute in one game, and then everything in between. So what I created was this opportunity to see kind of who was at the top and who was at the bottom and who was in the middle, in the gray area. With every team, we all know those 4 or 5 kids on a club team. We all know they're going to make the team. They're the top players on the team. They rarely come off the field, or they play a little bit differently than everyone else. Everyone's cheering for them. We all know that those 4 or 5 kids are going to make it. In this case, in Liverpool's case, it was players like Virgil van Dijk and Firmino and Alexander-Arnold and so on. So we all know that there's a bottom side as well. And as I said, Harvey Elliott had only played as a substitute in one. And as those players, if they were going into a youth tryout in the United States, then they would have to wonder, I only got a substitute in one, so maybe there's a better situation for me in another club. Maybe the coaches are thinking, if we have some kids show up to tryouts, we're going to make a change. And these might be the players that would be considered as part of that change. And then there's the gray area. And this is really interesting to me. A player like Origi had started in 2 matches. He was a substitute in 6. So he played in 80% of the games. And there's definitely a discussion to be had about him. And some coaches might agree and some coaches might disagree about where he stands in a team. And some people may say those 8 games and what he played was hugely important, where another coach may say, yeah, but potentially we could do better and make a change. So it's something to think about. Adam Lallana was in a similar situation. He didn't start any of those games, but he was a substitute in 6 matches. So that's definitely worth a conversation. It's definitely worth deciding whether or not going on the next year is the right fit for him. So when you look at it this way, you can see those players. Jordan Henderson started in 8 games. So he didn't play in every game, but he's obviously making a huge contribution. Sadio Mane started in 6, was a substitute in 1. And if you watched him play that year, you knew how big of an impact he was making. What do we do with players like that? So there are some conversations we had about the impact players are making. Then there's this idea of the second team. And these are players just outside the first team at Liverpool. And I'll often get parents will come to me and they'll say, oh, my child's on the second team and I know she's doing such a great job. She's playing a lot and they made her a captain on the team and she's really improving and I just know she's going to make the first team. Well, that may be true. And it's definitely true that she's improving. I'm sure that's the case. But there are also players on the first team that are improving as well. So when you look here, it's been a couple years since I made this now, and we'll see how many of those players on that second team for Liverpool were moved up. So there are a couple names on there that you have heard since then, but it's a challenging thing because it's not as simple as someone improving, and that's the role of a club, is to help players improve. So we hope that that's the case, but it doesn't necessarily just mean simply because someone improved that they're going to get promoted. Donald Thomas was a high jumper. In fact, he wasn't a high jumper most of his life. He loved basketball, and he was at a small school in the United States playing basketball when he got into a conversation with some guys on the track team at the school he was at. And they were talking about jumping and the height of jumping, and they were making bets with each other about who could jump the highest. And when Donald Thomas went over to the high jump area, he out-jumped everybody. And he did it in such a way that the guys on the track team said, you need to meet coach. And they took him straight to meet the coach, showed him what he could do, and he immediately joined the track team. 18 months after his first jump, he set the world record. So he did it in a way, too, that people that have been doing it all their lives said, I don't know if this should count, because the quality of what he was doing was so poor. He didn't do it technically the way it was supposed to be done, but he was just built differently. When they looked into it a little bit more, his Achilles tendon was shaped differently, and he was just built to high jump. I always said Michael Phelps was built to swim, and Michael Jordan was built to play basketball, and sometimes players just fall into the right places and athletes fall into the right places. So it was really interesting how he did it. He was just better. So even people that have been doing it all their lives, sometimes you just come across someone that's just better. I remember players that I played with in college that would make the college team after not touching a ball for the 8 months or so before the season started. And I was every day. I was in the weight room. I was getting touches of the ball every day. I was working on my left foot. When we showed up to camp, there were a couple players that were just better than me. And it's just the way it is. So what do you think about that? What about players coming in? At that time, Kylian Mbappe, there was a lot of talk about him joining Liverpool. Timo Werner ended up joining Chelsea that year. But there were some great players considering this is the same thing as kids from other clubs that are considering coming to tryouts. They've heard about good things happening in a certain club and they're not exactly happy where they are. They need a different situation. And what if they come in? So that can cause challenges for players as well. And this is real life and this happens. There are players to consider. Are they on their way out? There were players that were talking about leaving. This happens every year too. There's always some players. I don't know if I'm going to return next year. I think I'm going to go play with my classmates or people I used to play with, or there's a coach and I really enjoyed this other club and I'm going to give that a shot too. So those kind of things happen. There's always discussions about players potentially on their way out. So your position matters. I know a lot of coaches that they take the best 18 soccer players they can get. Regardless, probably you need a couple goalkeepers, but regardless of positions, otherwise they take the best players they can get. Where other coaches might take 5 midfielders, 5 defenders, 4 forwards, and then fill out the rest of the roster with a couple different players. But you could be in a situation where you're the 8th or 9th best player on the team, but you're also the 7th best forward, and that team's not going to carry 7 forwards, so they may not choose you, and that's a coach's right and a coach's choice, and it makes it different though. At one club you might have made the team because you were one of the top 18 players, but at a different club or even within the same club with a different coach, you don't make the team because they don't take as many forwards. So that can be challenging as well. When you're considering new players coming in, this was a player that was at Norwich at the time, or players moving up from the second team to the first team. Sometimes coaches will say, is that player good enough to start? If I have a player that comes in and is equal to my 17th or 18th player on the existing team, do you make a change? Sometimes one of the benchmarks that coaches will set is that player good enough to start for my team? And that would certainly justify making a change. So you may want to find out from coaches, what are they thinking? What are they viewing? What are they looking for in players to be promoted or new players coming into the club? The coach's preference is very important. There are a couple situations that were really interesting at the time where they were going on at the same time this was going on. And one of those was what was happening with Jose Mourinho and Juan Mata. At Chelsea, when Jose returned, he sent Mata away. He sent him to Manchester United in a trade deal, and he wasn't working out at Chelsea. He wasn't playing him much, and they sent Mata away. Well, then soon after, Jose got the job at Manchester United. And a lot of people were very concerned for Mata because they assumed the same thing was going to happen. Well, it's not what happened. So what I did was I highlighted a quote from Mata on the matter. And he was saying right here what he was talking about. A lot of people believed that history was going to repeat itself. And he was determined to make sure it wouldn't. That's hugely important. He was controlling what he could control. In fact, he said, to do so, I focused, like many times during my career, on what I could control. My dedication, my professionalism, my commitment. Well, it was massively important because at Manchester United, Mata fit in differently. So even with the same coach, this wasn't a matter of good enough or bad enough. It was the right fit for the team. So Jose used him much more at Manchester United. And Mata did the healthy thing of focusing on what he could control. So sometimes the question of favorites comes up. And I promise you, yes, coaches do have favorites. Just like players have favorites and parents have favorites. If you take the parent of a U18 soccer player, I guarantee those parents will look in the past and say that their favorite coach their child ever worked for was so-and-so. If I ask players to tell me who their favorite coach is, even on a staff, their high school staff, or within their club or something like that, you will immediately tell me who your favorite coach was. If I asked players on the team who their favorite players on the team were, you would tell me who your favorites were. How we get about favorites and who those favorites are to coaches is sometimes different. My college coach used to say his favorites were the 11 best players on his team. I can tell you for sure that my favorites are the players that are never going to cause me any issues. They're going to work super hard. They're going to come to practice with a smile on their face. They're going to make me smile. They're going to make me laugh. I love players that have some character and a little bit ornery and goofy and know when to work and battle and play hard, but also know when to smile and laugh. I have favorites. I coach my daughter right now. My college team is my oldest daughter. I guarantee you she's my favorite player. So we all have favorites. I think the real question is, instead of saying it's right or wrong, the real question is, how do you become a coach's favorite? So try to figure out what your coach is looking for and make sure that you're doing those things. There's a lot of discussion about what happens during the tryout dates and the history. I sometimes wish that my club kids didn't come to tryouts. Not that they didn't sign up or anything like that, but that they didn't come, because I really want to focus on the new kids, especially in some age groups where we have larger numbers. The only reason I really want my current kids there is to have them play against some of the new kids and see how those new kids fare. Not that I've already made up my mind, but I do already know everything I need to know about my current players. So sometimes a current player who's been with a club for 3 or 4 years will show up at tryouts and feel they had a bad tryout. That has very little to do with the final decisions, the decisions that are made, to be fair. Your tryout dates, if you're new to the club, are important. Sometimes people say, how many tryout dates or how many dates should this player be at? They're considering leaving their club and they want to go to 3 or 4 different tryouts. Well, it's going to make it a little bit tougher for coaches to adequately assess where you are, because the more I get to see that player, the better. So technically, you just need to be registered for a club's tryouts to offer a spot to someone. So just sometimes players are traveling, sometimes players are injured and they can't try out. So you just have to be registered. But that doesn't mean you're going to make the team just because you were registered. So if you can show up to all 3 days that a club has, if they have 3, that's hugely important, because it's going to help someone assess you a lot better. If you only show up to 1, especially if it's the first night, who knows what's going to happen the second and third sessions, because they might move on without you. So I would make sure that you give everyone the best opportunity to assess you as possible and be at as much as you can be at. This discussion is trying out for Liverpool or Norwich. At that time, you could look at a player like Tim Krul. Tim Krul is a Dutch goalkeeper that was playing for Norwich at the time. If he tried out for Liverpool's team, he's a tremendous goalkeeper. He may have made the team, but he wasn't going to start. And the way that team was, he was not likely going to play much. Yet at Norwich, he started 27 of the 29 games while he was there, or at least the 29 games before I did this presentation. I can't exactly remember how I got to that number 29 at the point. But he had started in 27 of the previous 29 games. So he's got an opportunity to play there and develop as a player and enjoy what he's doing. Now he could have played at a slightly better team, but also might have sat on the bench. So it's not right or wrong, but people have to make a decision about what they want to get out of their situation. You may be happy to be on a better team but not play as much. I always hope that players will take situations where they can develop and they're actually playing and that kind of thing. So, to each his own, and everyone's got to consider what they think is most important. What I want to do here at the end is leave you with a quote by Steven Gerrard. He was talking about young players and their ability to try to make it into a team, and in particular Liverpool. And since that's who I based this on, then I figured that would be a good one to do it. But this is Steven Gerrard talking a little bit about how incoming players have to prove they're better. And I'm going to let him say it, but what he's really saying is, sometimes people say, I'm just as good as so-and-so in this other club I tried out for. I'm just as good as so-and-so on the first team, and I'm hoping to be promoted from the second team to the first team. So why wouldn't I be moved up if I'm just as good? But as coaches, we all make connections to the players that we coach, and it is challenging. As I said, coaches have a lot of anxiety about this too, and one of the difficult things it is sometimes to displace someone is finding the right time to do it, and if it is what the right thing is. So when someone says, I'm just as good as, I'm just telling you, as a player going into a new club or trying to be promoted, it's very important that you show why you're better than someone. You have to make that decision a little bit easier on people. So show me why you're better, and you're going to have a much better opportunity of being promoted or making that team. So best of luck to you, and I'm going to leave you with this quote.
So when you're breaking through and you feel like you're close, you've got to be better than whoever's in your position in the first team. And that is It's a massive challenge for these kids.